Good morning. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday, and I am the Chair of the Audit Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'll call meeting 11 of the Audit Committee to order. Welcome, everybody. Today's meeting is being held with members of Council and City staff participating by video conference. The public continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. These measures are necessary to comply with public health guidelines and prevent the spread of COVID-19. I ask everyone for their patience with any delays or any technical issues. At this time, I will just check with the clerk if there are any registered speakers.
Mr. Chair, I can confirm that we have no registered speakers for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members, this is a paperless meeting. The clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and via the CMP, the clerk's meeting portal. City Clerk's IT staff will be available to help members with their devices. Members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and ensure that your video is turned on. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or to speak. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure that they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you that you must submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at auditcommittee@toronto.ca, that's AUDITCTTE, to help with motions. If there are any visiting members of council attending the meeting today, I would encourage you to turn on your video so that I know that you're present and I can give you the opportunity to speak or to ask questions of staff. This will also assist the clerk's staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item, number, and the nature of the interest. Next, we will need a motion to confirm the minutes from our last committee meeting on November 2nd, 2021. May I have a motion from a member? Councillor Matlow, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Okay, I'm just going to go through the items. We have 13 items on the agenda. And we'll take them one by one. And if members just bear with me and be patient, because I have some annotations that there are presentations and I just want to make sure I catch them all. So the first item is AU 11.1, Auditor General's 2021 Annual Report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's office. I'm going to hold that in my name because there is a presentation from the Auditor General. AU 11.2 is Auditor General's 2021 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. There's also a presentation from the Auditor General, so I'll hold that in my name. AU 11.3 is revisiting legacy rental replacement policies to align them with the city's affordable rental housing expectations.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councillor Matlow?
Just while I'm speaking, I'd appreciate holding point 3 and point 8.
We shall do so, and I will note that there's a presentation on 11.3 as well.
Thank you.
AU 11.4 is Toronto Community Housing Corporation embedding accountability into service delivery, lessons learned from the audit of contracted property management services. Councillor Ford, thank you. I'll hold that. Now, Councillor Ford, there is a presentation available on this item. You would like to have that presentation? Great. We'll ask the Auditor General to have that ready for us. AU 11.5, Toronto Water Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, the SCADA System Security, results of the follow-up of previous audit recommendations. Are there any members wishing to hold this item or ask questions or speak to it? Seeing none, I will take a motion to adopt the item. Councillor Ford, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 11.6, which is the status of the governance framework for effective cybersecurity management. Any members wishing to ask questions?
Yes, I'll hold. Thank you, Filion.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion, and I will make a note to the clerk that because there are confidential materials, we may need to go in camera for that particular item. AU 11.7 is status of Toronto Fire Services implementation of recommendations from the Auditor General's Critical Systems Cybersecurity Review. Are there any members wishing to hold this item to ask questions or speak to the item? Seeing none, may I have a motion from a member to adopt the item? Councillor Nunziata, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 11.8, which is getting to the root of the issues, January 2022 performance update of urban forestry contractors and city crews and consolidated summary and analysis of 2021 forestry operations related complaints. Councillor Matlow, you've indicated you had some questions on that item, so we will ensure that that is held. AU 11.9 is status of audit recommendations for parks, forestry, and recreation. Are there any members with questions on this item or wishing to speak to it? Seeing none, may I have a member make a motion to adopt the staff recommendations? Councillor Nunziata, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 11.10, City of Toronto Audit Planning Report for the year ended December 31st, 2021. I will hold this in my name as there is a presentation on this material. AU 11.11, Arena's 2020 Audited Financial Statements Report to and status of 2020 Audited Financial Statements. Are there any questions on this item or members wishing to speak to it? Seeing none, may I have a member propose the staff recommendations? Councillor Nunziata, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. AU 11.12, Community Centers 2020 Audited Financial Statements for Scadding Court Community Center. Are there any members with questions on this item or members wishing to speak to the item? Seeing none, may I have a member propose the staff recommendations? Councillor Ford moves the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And the final item, AU 11.13, Auditor General's Office of the City of Toronto, report on the results of applying specified auditing procedures to financial information other than financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2020. Are there any members with questions on that item wishing to speak to it? Seeing none, may I have a member of the committee propose to move the staff recommendations? Councillor Ford moves the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Councillor Matlow, I think you had an interest in resorting the order of the items.
That's very considerate of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm only going to be able to participate this morning. So I wonder if the rest of the committee is okay with this. If we just attend to the two items, both point 3 and point 8, just this morning. So however you'd like to do that, Mr. Chair, but if everyone's okay with that, I'd appreciate it.
If there are no objections, I would propose that they be handled as the first two items of business. Are there any objections to that? All right, all those in favor, any opposed? That is carried. And one final small housekeeping item, I would just ask if any members had a reason to ask questions or hold, sorry, we did hold it for a presentation, item number 1, because it varies so many different business areas of the city. If there's an indication for staff to be prepared for questions, if you could bring it to my attention or the clerk's attention so that we can communicate with those staff and have them ready. Thank you. Otherwise, we will go to item number, bear with me while I get the correct item number. AU 11.3 is our first item as we've reordered. That is revisiting legacy rental housing replacement policies to align them with the city's affordable rental housing expectations. I will pass the microphone. Sorry, Councillor Matlow.
Sorry, I just a point of order. I was remiss to let you know earlier. I've got a couple questions that I'm going to need to go in camera on the confidential portion of it as well.
Understood. Madam Clerk, if you can make a note of that, and we will work it out with Councillor Matlow with respect to the timing of going into camera. Otherwise, I will turn the microphone over to Madam Auditor General as you have a presentation for the committee. Thank you.
We do. Thank you very much. And just to introduce this, my Deputy Auditor General is going to provide the presentation. I'd like to thank the team for working on this. One thing I'd like to say is that really there's two parts. The public part is the policy portion, which we've completed, and the second part is still underway. We will probably have, well, we will have a result by June. So that is where we are with this, and I'm going to turn it over to my Deputy Auditor General, Anna Chan, because the reason we're doing this piece now is because there's policy pieces that that City Council might want to address. And so we wanted to make sure you had this piece first.
Thank you, Auditor General. Good morning, Chair and members of Audit Committee. I'm joined by my colleagues Mira Movchevich and Deanna Laney, who conducted this audit. Next slide, please. Before beginning, I want to orient you to the two different frameworks related to affordable rental housing, which have different access and eligibility policy requirements, and is the reason why there might be a policy gap. On the one hand, we have the rental replacement framework under authority of Section 111 of the City of Toronto Act and operationalized in Municipal Code Chapter 667. This framework addresses replacement of rental units and requires when buildings with rental units are demolished that owners replace the rental units to ensure rental housing in the city is preserved. The focus is to make sure that if an existing tenant was displaced, they could return. Where affordability comes in is that the owners are required on redevelopment to provide the same number of units at similar rents at time of demolition, meaning that if, for example, 10 units at affordable rents were demolished, the developer would need to provide 10 replacement units at similar affordable rents on redevelopment. Other than the requirement to offer all units on a fair and open basis, historically, there have been no other requirements that would be typical of other affordable rental housing programs, such as access plans for advertising to those needing affordable housing, lower income households, and income eligibility requirements. On the other side, we have affordable rental housing subject to the Municipal Housing Facility Bylaw. These are units overseen by Housing Secretariat and SSHA. Under these frameworks, there are access plan requirements, there are income limits for tenant households, and often the affordable rental housing is tied to some form of city funding to support affordability, like rental supplements, housing allowances, RGI subsidies, and those programs have their own income eligibility and income testing requirements. We've already done audits before of SSHA and the Housing Secretariat's processes to oversee access and selection and income eligibility through our prior audits of SSHA's current waiting list system, eligibility for RGI assistance, and the Housing Secretariat's Affordable Homeownership Program. They are moving forward with addressing our recommendations from those audits and have indicated they're considering the relevance of those recommendations to all other affordable rental programs they oversee. What our report identifies is the opportunity to revisit the city's rental replacement requirements to catch them up to where the city is heading with affordable rental housing. And city planning is moving in that direction with new Section 111 agreements 2020 and after. They have included requirements for access plans. Next slide, please. So by way of background, in December 2020 and again in July 2021, City Council requested the Auditor General to add to our 2021 work plan an audit of previous replacement rental units to assess whether matters relating to one specific rental replacement site was isolated and whether units had been allocated in accordance with city policy. This audit focuses on answering the question, did city planning have sufficient processes to ensure that owners complied with the city requirements for placement of affordable rental units? To be clear, our audit focused on compliance with the Section 111 requirements for access and eligibility of units that were demolished and then replaced on redevelopment where the replacement units were required to be at affordable rents. We didn't review compliance with other requirements that may have been included in Section 111 agreement. Next slide, please. So what's the city's rental replacement policy? What are Section 111 agreements? The replacement policy is set out in the city's official plan. The authority to require developments to replace rental units demolished in redevelopment with the same number of units comes from Section 111 of the City of Toronto Act, and the policy is operationalized through Municipal Code Chapter 667 and what is referred to as Section 111 agreements between the city and developers. What's important here is recognizing that at the time these policies came into effect in 2007, the city's policy requirements focused on preserving the city's rental housing stock. That being said, we conducted our audit through the lens of looking at whether city planning's process and agreements supported the city's priorities for providing fair and transparent access to affordable housing opportunities and to individuals and families who need financial assistance to be able to afford housing. Next slide, please. Affordable rental units where access and eligibility is overseen by city planning, the red bubble is the focus of this audit. The number of units under city planning's rental replacement framework is a relatively small proportion compared to affordable rental housing through the Municipal Housing Facility Framework, where Housing Secretariat and SSHA oversees access and eligibility. In our audit, we reviewed agreements for over 80% of affordable rental replacement units in developments where the units were fully or partially occupied. Next slide, please. So what we found and what we're seeing on this slide in green is what the rental replacement policy requires. Simply speaking, the city's rental replacement policy objectives in Section 111 agreements as written were designed to preserve rental stock by requiring that demolished rental units are replaced with the same number, size, and type of rental units, that existing tenants that were displaced have the right to return to the same size and type of unit should they choose to do so, and that replaced units are charged at similar rents to the rents at the time of demolition. In red, we highlight what the agreements do not address, which are requirements the SSHA has in place for their affordable rental housing under the Municipal Housing Facility Framework. Next slide, please. So drilling into this red piece a little deeper, keeping in mind that these agreements focused on making sure existing tenants could return to a replacement unit, what we found was that Section 111 agreements generally do require that all rental replacement units be offered to the public on a fair and open basis. But what's important here in red is what the agreements don't address. There are no eligibility requirements based on financial need. Agreements also do not make clear the city's expected methods for how affordable rental replacement units are to be marketed and offered on a fair and open basis. In other words, based on the agreements as written, there were no requirements to require that owners offer affordable rental units only to tenant households who need affordable housing, like lower income households. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? When the agreements are not clear on the city's expectations for how units would be offered to the general public on a fair and open basis, this means acceptable methods for marketing and filling affordable units were left open to interpretation. This can lead to disagreements between the city and owner on whether it's sufficient, for example, to post a sign in the building's window or list available units on a leasing website, or whether it is expected that owners specifically advertise affordable rental opportunities to lower income households through community agencies or a centralized waiting list. What we're seeing here is that the requirements can mean different things to different people. Secondly, agreements did not contain income-based eligibility requirements, meaning the city has little ability to require that available affordable units only go to tenant households who need assistance to afford housing. City planning does not check if new tenants of affordable rental units are lower income households, since they don't have the authority to do so under the existing agreements. And thirdly, we found there's limited information retained in city planning files because agreements don't require the owners to retain and provide records on how the units were offered to the general public. And also keeping in mind that some of these agreements were executed and developments occupied several years ago, and some owners may not have retained the records for so long. What this means is the city may find it difficult to now obtain records and to take any further action regarding the way the units were offered. If I were to summarize, what we're seeing here is that the Section 111 agreement requirements for rental replacements didn't keep pace with the city's affordable housing priorities, and there is an opportunity now here to close that gap. There is no question that everyone's priority is helping to get the right people at the right income level into available affordable units. Next slide, please. So to close off, our report includes 2 recommendations. One focused on strengthening access requirements in Section 111 agreements, requiring owners to submit access plans and to retain documentation and records to support implementation of those plans. And a second recommendation to look towards standardizing eligibility requirements for affordable rental housing across the city's frameworks. For city planning to consider how to incorporate the affordable rental housing expectations into Municipal Code 667 and Section 111 requirements. Finally, recognizing that city planning, SSHA, and Housing Secretary are jointly working towards harmonizing their processes and requirements. They reported this week to Planning and Housing Committee on plans for developing a centralized access system. And as recommended in our July 2021 report, these divisions should consider relevance of our prior audit recommendations regarding access and selection and eligibility from our prior audits on the waiting list, RJI eligibility, and affordable home ownership. Because of our past audits and work with SSHA and Housing Secretariat and what they're doing to implement our recommendations, the city is better positioned to do this in a more standardized way. Management has agreed to the recommendations in our report, and we do appreciate very much the cooperation of city planning and legal services staff when we were conducting this audit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. I will ask the committee members if there are questions. I see Councillor Matlow's hand up already. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. The question that I ask, I may be actually be able to cover this in public, given some of the points in your presentation, because what I'm interested in is already fully in the public record. So we'll see if we need to go into camera or not. And then, of course, to the clerk, steer me right if I go wrong. You mentioned how our expectation has always been that the units be provided in a fair and open basis, but that the interpretation or the gaps in clarity about what that meant, the definition, allowed, in your words, for different. It could mean different things to different people. In the case of the Bell size and Young matter, what we know on the public record already is that the head of CREATO gave these units out essentially to friends and family, almost with preferential opportunities. How in any way could that reasonably be considered a fair and open basis? And if you agree with the premise of my question, which is that it couldn't be to any reasonable person, then why would it not be relatively easy for us to retroactively address our concerns with how that was handled?
Thank you. And Chair, that's a matter that is subject to the confidential attachment, and my work is ongoing. But your question, Councillor, is not lost on me in relation to that. Also, I just want to say that in raising this and requesting this audit by you, it has identified a key gap. Although we were looking at 316 units, It can extend up to 2,500 units, and so it is a very important matter. But to your specific question, I'm not in a position to answer that now. You can re-ask it in June.
I think that's reasonable, and I won't need to go in camera. I think that more of my questions I can do offline with the AG directly as we continue down this road. And I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow, and thank you, Madam Auditor General, for your guidance on the content. Are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, just briefly, I'm just on the same line of thought as Councillor Matlow here. Is it the councillor does want to go into confidential? Is that correct? Or were you just going to?
I don't think it's necessary, Councillor Ford, for me at least.
Okay. So my question would be to the Auditor General. I know you made kind of a very vague comment on that. On that topic specifically, you wouldn't have any more to share until June, you said, specifically to Councillor Matlow's question?
That is correct. This portion of the review needed to be completed before I finished off the second portion of the review, but this is your policy portion where you can take some action, and I will complete phase 2 by June.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted some clarity on that. I'm good, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Are there any other questions? Maybe I'll take just a quick moment to ask Ms. Wumbakis, who I think is on the call, just to, we don't have to go through the management response, but maybe just a bit of an overlay of where the policy will head and what the work plan is, because this particular report, although there's a particular matter that's been raised by members of council, also speaks to the overarching policy and really is a catalyst for change and to modernize the policy. But if we could have just maybe that element just added to the conversation, I think it would be helpful for members of council.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. Quite simply, the original policy framework, which was developed in 2002, was really created to address rental replacement housing. That was a challenge to the city in 2002. The aspect of ensuring affordability was not the key focus of the policy at that time. However, we're far from 2002, far from 2006, when the policy was subsequently approved by the Ontario Municipal Board. So city planning is looking at what official plan and municipal code changes may be required in order to address and strengthen the policy to be more focused, not just on the replacement, but on ensuring affordability. So that's one component that we will be addressing. I will indicate that I do not anticipate, though, that our outcomes will be finalized before June, but our June report will indicate what our next steps are in this regard. In terms of changing our Section 111 agreements, we are and have since 2020 enhanced our existing agreements and are requiring and requesting, because it's difficult to require right now because we don't have a system that exists, that applicants do utilize the shared access system that is being developed and that we hope to bring forward to Planning and Housing and Council in June of this year. And that would be the third piece, so that the city has one centralized system for individuals accessing all forms of affordable housing. So it would not be a city planning led system, it would be a central system for all units. So those are the changes that we're moving towards bringing forward.
Thank you. Are there any other members with questions? Seeing none, any members wishing to speak? Councillor Matlow, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, when I first raised these concerns, I just saw something egregious happen. That I think was inarguably concerning to us all, and the trust in the system, and at a very legitimate issue for the Auditor General to investigate. And I want to acknowledge the tremendous work of the Auditor General and her team on this issue. You've taken it seriously. You've placed proper attention on it, and you've consistently provided really helpful recommendations. And I want to acknowledge your work along with the chair of our committee, Stephen Holliday, for just again the seriousness that you've brought to this matter. And I also want to acknowledge planning staff as well. I must admit, and I'm sure I conveyed this at our last meeting when we discussed this issue. I was skeptical of just the ability of planning, not their intention or their acumen. I think that they're terrific at planning, but I was skeptical whether or not they were good at investigations, and I am convinced that they are really doing their very best to take all of this very seriously as well, and they are working with the AG on her recommendations. So I just wanted to acknowledge the terrific report that we see in front of us. Connecting to the question that I asked earlier. There is more work to be done on certain cases looking back and understanding how decisions were made. While we look forward, and principally so, we cannot forget the importance of accountability, both because accountability is important, but it also sends a very clear message looking forward that we take public trust very seriously. I'm speaking carefully, obviously, just not to. I don't want to go too deeply into that matter because we're going to hear more about it in June, and it's on figurative purple paper today. But I look forward to working with the AG on it, and I wanted to balance out my criticism earlier with also I think very fair acknowledgement to everyone who's working on this, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Anyone else wishing to speak? I'll offer two brief comments. The first is, I believe it's important to give credit where credit is due. Councillor Matlow recognized this issue with tenacity and moved a motion about a year ago. I think it was last July, so not quite a year ago, but some time ago. I looked it up. And so I just wish to thank Councillor Matlow for recognizing this matter and for everybody that contributed to the report. Just on the topic in general, affordable units or subsidized units, we're talking about degree of subsidy, has different names, are incredibly important public resources. And they quite literally mean the difference between somebody having an M postal code or a 416 phone number or a 905 phone number or an L postal code. They make the difference of being able to live in the city. And so getting an affordable unit that's subsidized for a period of time is a life-altering event. It affects where you live. It might affect where you work, where you go to school, everything. And so having public confidence and trust in the process on how people get access to those resources is incredibly important in how the general public perceives our government and perceives how these resources are given out. So, I mean, that's a general comment. There's a lot of aspects to the system that go beyond this audit, but I think this is a really important piece. I'm glad it occurred, and I'm glad that it occurred now and not later. So a very big thanks and a very big word of encouragement to all of the people that are working on the systems that will maintain transparency and order in how the city provides those resources to those that apply for it. Thank you. I guess I should ask for a member of the committee to move the motions. Councillor Matlow moves the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. Thank you. On to the next item.
Mr. Chair?
Madam Clerk?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. We also have a motion to adopt the recommendations in the City Solicitor's report, which is
Yes.
item AU 11.38. So I'll just ask my colleague Brad just to display that on the screen for the committee's consideration.
Thank you. This was the supplemental report. Councillor Matlow, do you wish to move those as well? All right. We'll wait for those to be displayed. Councillor Matlow moves the recommendations of the supplemental report. All those in favor, any opposed, and that is carried. Madam Clerk, do you need me to take a revote, or is this item clear?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if you can just also have a motion just to adopt the item as amended, that would be great.
All right. Motion to adopt the item as amended from Councillor Matlow. All those in favor, any opposed, and that is carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to the second reordered item, that is AU 11.8, getting to the root of the issues, second performance update of urban forestry contractors and city crews and consolidated summary and analysis of 2021 forestry operations related complaints. Councillor Matlow, just going to confirm here, I do not have a presentation, so Councillor Matlow, please go ahead with your questions.
Janie's going to be relieved to hear this. I have no questions. I have a motion coming out of it, but nothing for her to fear.
So I will check with other committee members if there are any questions on this item. Councillor Fillion, please go ahead.
Yes, hi, Janie. And I think this is a public question, but you can guide me, Mr. Chair, if it isn't. The spot checks we do, and that's, I'm very relieved we're doing that. Is there, are we just recovering like dollar for dollar, like we find a situation where somebody is overcharging or charging for something that hasn't been done? Are we just recovering that amount, or are we extrapolating from that to recover something larger?
So, excuse me, through the chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor Fillion. I think it's a bit of a layered response. We can only recover, and I'm going to ask Nadine to weigh in and correct me if I'm wrong. We can only recover for actual, in real time, for actual discrepancies that we find. So we can't, as an example, if we have a 2% overall recovery rate from the observed hours, as you've noted, we can't extrapolate that to the total value of the contract, because we're assessing the work in real time, not just through the spot checks, but through a number of other oversight mechanisms as well, which includes the GPS tracking and the forestry work order tracking and all kinds of other things. So I think the answer is we're recovering everything in real time where there is anything to recover. What has been very helpful on the spot checking, so to speak, is that if we uncover discrepancies in any of the other oversight, we also use the spot checking as a key to following up on any of those discrepancies if any patterns exist. So it's really the last level of oversight that we have now built into this contract management approach.
No, thanks. And I guess I understand the problems, but if, for example, someone was marked down that they were pruning a tree while they were sitting in their truck having lunch, I think we can be pretty confident that you didn't just happen to catch them the only time they were doing that.
Through the speaker, there is, contractual approaches to how discrepancies are managed, and I think the differences between how we're managing now and before is that we were going back and looking at the findings from the Auditor General and so to speak retroactively making some assumptions based on those averages. But when we're in a real contract and tracking in real time, we actually deal with discrepancies on a case-by-case basis.
So if you find something like that, I just made up that example, but all the examples from the
No, I understand.
from the audit. what do we do anything other than say, well, you owe us for an hour because you weren't really pruning the tree?
Right, fair question, and I'm going to ask Nadine to answer that. We do. There is a whole, a much more formal process around tracking any of those inconsistencies now, with very specific repercussions attached to what we find. So I'll ask Nadine to fill in the blanks on that for me.
Sure, you're correct. We are finding these discrepancies in real time and following up with the vendors to either get credit invoices. But what we also do is we meet with the vendors on a monthly basis, and we bring up the contract terms and we go through a performance check every month. And so we are tracking progress of the vendors and how they're meeting up to the terms of the contract as we go along. So those meetings are documented and they're minuted, and we follow up the following month to make sure that the actions that we have requested have been followed through, whether it's putting a crew member on notice or potentially demoting a crew leader for a period of time, also seeking those invoice reconciliations.
And do we keep, is it clear to the companies that we are, and are we in fact keeping records of all of this, and they will be a factor in whether a company is awarded a contract next time that process comes up?
Yeah, it's very clear and open to the contractors what we're doing, because we bring up these these monthly performance checks on the screen when we have the meetings with them, and they're minuted, and we send them the performance reports each month with the actions that have been followed up.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting to be a bit more specific then. When the contract time comes around, would I be able to ask and receive information on how many incidents there have been by vendor? And if, one company is clearly not supervising its staff or cracking down sufficiently, can I be confident that that would be a reason why their contract would not be renewed?
So
Last
through
question.
I'll just say through you, Mr. Chair, I think those, as Nadine has indicated, because they're now formal recordings of all of those discrepancies and any performance issues, they would go with the contractor into the performance evaluation process of any RFP that's received. For the existing contractors that we have, we should note that we have expanded. We've gone from 3 contractors to 5 contractors, and we'll be issuing new RFPs for 2023 that will again break things down and hopefully open up that specter even more. So we are dealing with many more contractors now, but yes, the past performance becomes part of the evaluation process of any future RFPs.
Thank you.
So, thanks, Councillor Fillion. I'm quite open to a second round, but I'll give some other councillors a chance if there's other questions. I'll go ahead and ask one then. I just wanted to extrapolate on a concept that was broached by Councillor Fillion. Just generally speaking, with respect to contract management, and maybe in this specific case, what would it take to build mechanisms in there that allow us to recoup or make adjustments just based on sampling? I mean, it's like an auditing concept.
It's
I'll open that up.
Well, you're the speaker, not through you, but to Mr. Chair. I think these are really, questions that would have to be forwarded for some further follow-up to both legal and to our procurement folks, because it wouldn't just be, specifically about these contracts. These are broader questions about contract management that, with respect, I'm not sure I'm in a position to answer them, but certainly we can, get some information to help along with those answers, either after the meeting, or we can report after, again on it.
Fair enough, Janie. I recognize it may be something that's a bit more related to procurement or contracts. I don't know, does anyone else have experience in seeing this in other places that we could draw upon?
I'm going to ask Beverly to answer. There you go.
Yeah, it is statistical sampling and extrapolation is used across various milieu. So I have experience in that area. I believe there is an opportunity here. What it does is it allows for those situations where you can't be tracking every dollar, but you're just trying to look at a sample item or a truck or a representative sample of hours and say if that is the process that's used and they're using so many hours, you can extrapolate it, but it has to be done with rigor. Rigor doesn't mean hard, it means done right. And it means making sure that it's set up with statistical sampling methodology. Things are selected at random. But the second part, which is really exciting, is that you have to have evidence to show what's wrong. And we're now Forestry is going out and doing that part. You have both. So being clear on the rigor with an expert and setting it up properly. And then you've got this piece with that hour, you have somebody that's being monitored, watched, and maybe taped. And so it does allow for situations where if something is similar person over and over, you can acquire or potentially extrapolate and recover funds at a greater amount. So I think it's a good idea to take it away. I put those pieces together, come back with a legal opinion, but I believe it can be done.
So to play back the concept, properly planned and
Yes.
built in, one transgression that is found begets a larger remuneration, right? So it becomes, I suppose that helps us as contract managers because then there's an increased focus about even the smallest transgression because it's a multiplier, makes things easier for everybody. Okay, and so that's probably a procurement discussion, I think. Is that what I'm hearing? Great.
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can sort of jump in.
Second round.
Well, no, it's a question of you, I guess. So don't know if I'm procedurally correct here, but I'm wondering if we can get a report either at the next audit or preferably at council on this point. And I don't have a motion because I'm not clear on who that would be from.
I think we should, if you want that, I think you should write the motion. We can stand the item down. Councillor Matlow, if that's okay, you didn't need to go into camera on this. We could stand it down and get a motion in.
And actually, minor point of order, but the clerk just advised me, you would have been copied on it now as well, that the motion that I intended to move on this item, Julie is advising that it be more properly moved on 11.1, ironically. So
okay.
I'll just do that then, and then we'll obviously just get to one right after, so I'm fine. Okay,
so we're going to go to 11.1 next. Councillor Nunziata, so maybe we'll get to the speaking. If you want to slip a motion in, we've got a few moments. If we have to stand it down, we can reorder. I'll just turn to Councillor Nunziata for questions.
Yeah, I just have one question to Jenny. So as you know, what's frustrating is when councils put a request in for tree pruning and we're told it takes 8 to 9 months or, whatever, which is frustrating. So with this review, will that help where we don't actually have to wait for a year to get trees pruned?
So, through the speaker to you, Councillor Nunziata, I think there's two separate issues here. The one is ensuring that the contractors are performing to the stipulations of the contract, and we're getting value for money with less wasted time. The other piece is around the general workload around tree pruning and the process around that, which really speaks to a larger resourcing issue than just contract management. And also speaks to, and Kim can fill in the blanks, but there is actually a tree pruning standard that we try to keep up within the urban forestry, urban canopy standards and policies. And there isn't a way to easily just reduce the response time into an immediate sort of thing, as Nadine can likely answer. All of the tree pruning requests are assessed for priority based on the condition of the tree, and if there's any dangers or imminent dangers that are seen, those trees are obviously dealt with right away, and the ones that through our arborists assessment can wait a little longer are put through the general pruning cycle. So there's It's a complicated answer to a problem that really has to do with workflow and workload and prioritization of the orders that we get.
Yeah, but Janie, the reason I asked this question is if we're looking at the contracts and we find that we're being billed for time that they're not working, the contractors, then some of these trees that have to be pruned that are on the list, they're not doing. And that's why it's taking months to be pruned because, you know, they're not doing the pruning. I mean, are these not the same? Are these not the same contracts? Like the contract?
It's a combination of city crews and contract crews. It's depending on what the job is. It would depend on who responds to it. So I think the idea, Councillor, is that, you know, generally we would have greater efficiencies and be able to respond to more requests in a more timely manner. But I couldn't say that, you know, a 9-month wait would go down to a 1-month wait. I think we want to try and certainly speed up those work orders as much as possible with the resources that we have.
I don't know. I just feel this is all connected. But anyway, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other members of council wishing to ask questions on this item? I do not see any. Any members wishing to speak? Councillor Matlow, please go ahead.
So I had a motion that was not directly related to this matter, but I believe was in order because it sort of extends out of it, but I will move it on the next item, point 1. And you'll see what it is in a moment, but it is inspired by the good work that Janie and her team have done on this item, in particular contract management. You know, we like, similar to the spirit of what I brought up with the rental replacement issue. I think the criticism that many of us provided was quite just when we learned about the behavior of many of the contractors. Equally, the response by staff, I think, has been exemplary. And you know, all the different ways, the many ways that the Janie and her team have provided to ensure more accountability for the terms of those contracts and our expectations, provide me with far more confidence that the oversight that they will provide now, which, yes, admittedly should have and was not provided before, will be far more effective, and we can have far more confidence that the expectations that we have of our contractors will in fact be fulfilled. You know, proof will be in the pudding and time will tell, but I can't think of anything more that we can ask of staff to provide us at this point. And I just once again want to acknowledge the Auditor General for the candid, poignant, honest review and then recommendations that came forward, and equally to staff for just stepping it up and providing us with a roadmap that you will see in a moment. I would like to see extended to other services where we have contractors who we need to manage better and provide better oversight. So good job for setting the standard higher.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. I'll check, are there other members wishing to speak on this item? Okay, I will speak briefly. I will recognize that there is an opportunity here somewhere for a motion. It may not even be right here, right now, but this concept of extrapolation and monitoring, as Councillor Matlow mentioned, you know, extremely important contract management across the city. The public call us about what they see and what they don't see, or what they see and don't like, and rightfully so. They report things that aren't right. And an enormous work effort has gone up to go and perform better contract management. The question is, you know, can you sustain that? You want to do a large work effort to make a change. We hope change is occurring, although this report, I think we know that there is still things that have been found, even after the Auditor General's report, after things went on the news. We hope that it is getting better, and I think that's the message that I'm hearing. But that's because a lot of work's gone into the contract management. So how do you balance this off over time? And maybe one of the techniques is extrapolation. And it doesn't just mean forestry, as you pointed out, Councillor Matlow. It is contract management across the city. And I think a lot of the tools and lessons that have come out of this can and should be applied in other places, because I just think we will have better service for people. There's dollar savings, but just having better service is what it's about. And often these services are those day-to-day things that people call us about: cutting the trees, clearing the snow. I'm not saying there's not a report on it, but cutting the grass or fixing things. Those are all like day-to-day activities that, with good oversight, means good service and happy citizens. And that's what we really have to strive for. So I will express my thanks to everybody involved, including the management team, who seized upon the audit as a catalyst for change and are working through those changes. So with that, I will check if there's anyone else that wants to make a comment. If not, I'm happy to move the recommendations going forward.
Mr. Chair, I guess I could make a motion at council if the only reason to make it today is if we wanted a report, or if we wanted a report to council, but otherwise I can work on the wording and at council and don't need to hold this item up today.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fillion. I agree, and I'm happy to contribute. And I think it may be a larger discussion, including procurement and others.
Great, thanks.
All right, on that particular item, I move the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that item is carried. So we'll go back to the top of the list, and we'll begin with item AU 11.1. Which is the Auditor General's 2021 annual report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's office. Madam Auditor General, I believe that you have a presentation.
I do. And while they're putting my slides up, I'm going to thank my entire team for working on the report this year. Normally, historically, I've asked my team to provide this presentation because really, for any leader, you're only as good as the team that you work with, and they're a fantastic team. But this year is my last annual report, so I simply wanted to just give this as one of my parting messages. So we're responsible for assisting City Council to hold itself and city administrators accountable. And we do this by conducting our audits, and we do this by providing some transparency with the hope that things would improve. The municipal code requires that I prepare this report to demonstrate the value of the office. Next slide, please. When I arrived at the city, I was big on key performance indicators. And I said, when I leave, I'd like you to evaluate me on 3 things. 1, did we add value? 2, were we fair and balanced in our approach? And that's important because it's only through engagement and understanding that change can occur over the long term. You can do this job and do it respectfully. And number 3, I want to make sure that I left the office in a better spot than when I arrived and showed leadership. Next slide, please. So during 2021, we've had 14 impactful audits, investigations, and assessments. These included IT and critical infrastructure, contract management services for tree maintenance, as we've just discussed, and investigations into fraud and wrongdoing. And, we've made a big difference this year. So we've returned, we've been a catalyst for change such that for every dollar invested in our office, there's almost a $15 return. That's like $465 million since 2017 that we've been able to add value to back to the city. So adding value, we've just, next slide, please. Through adding value, when we speak about adding value, we're talking about cost reduction, avoiding costs, increasing revenues, and operational efficiencies. But there's also non-financial benefits, and that's through strengthened internal controls, things that we just spoke about: contract management, compliance, making sure that the services are delivered in the manner that the city intends them to be delivered. And when we talk about financial savings, we wait until that saving is realized. It might be years, but until we see that formal cost reduction, we audit it again, reviewed it again, we don't actually add it to our total. Next slide, please. And when we receive identify a revenue, we just track it for 5 years. And so this has been the increase. As I've started in 2014, but we just have for the last 5 years from 2017, and you can see it's steadily increased. Part of this is really the support also from city management who implement these recommendations. This committee who has asked for 30, 60, 90-day reports, the follow-up reports, and city council for supporting us through their budget. And so there is value being brought back to the city. Next slide, please. So very quickly, for 30 million, 31 million invested into my office, we've helped to inspire change of up to 465 million. So for every dollar, it's $15 return. Next slide, please. This is just one example of the impact of our work. This is long-term disability, and we prepared a report back in about 2016, 2017. And if you look at it, this black line that's steadily going up, it was actually going up at a faster level. That's about an 8% increase. We were seeing an 11% increase in long-term disability, but we wanted to be conservative in our projection, and we just showed it at being 8%. But after our audit, management took action. They did some education. They worked with Manulife. Manulife adjusted their service, their processes. They're engaging staff earlier to help to support them in return to work, to help to support them before they go off on long-term disability. And as you can see, because of all those actions of management and inspired by the Catalyst in our report, there's about $70 million difference there. It's quite a bit. I'm 68 million by 2020. So the red line shows where it would have gone, and the black line shows a continuing cost of the shows where it is and how we've been able to off ramp the increase. And so that blue bucket shows you the actual value avoidance of long-term disability. Not only is there a cost impact, it impacts people's lives in a positive way to be supported to come back to work. Next slide, please. So in relation to savings, Councillor Nunziata supported and asked that we track it into the budgets to show where budgets have been, savings have been reflected in the budgets. And I just have a quote from Josie Levita here. TTC has included some of it in their budget where they could, and they talked about the AG as a way to knit into their own transformation work the audit recommendations so that they could continue on the continuous improvement path. So that's added value. Now, the next slide, please. What you'll see is that not everything is actually a budget bottom line. The change in long-term disability, for example, is a cost avoidance, so it wouldn't appear on the bottom line. You'll see on page, I think it's page 30, I'm not sure, of our report, there's a table in there, and it just shows you how we've accounted for every saving. Some of it's in the budget, others are cost avoidance, and we put a legend in the page 30, yes, we put a legend in our report of how we've accounted for this, and this has been inspired by Councillor Nunziata. Next slide, please. But then there's also non-quantifiable benefits, things like fire services, water SCADA system. You know, when we look at things like the safety of citizens and how it's being impacted by ransomware, being as tight as possible is really important. And so we do audits, we do assessments, we can do many different kinds of reports in this area to bring to council a transparent picture of the safety of our systems. And the city IT and CISO group are acting on all of these recommendations. So that's exciting to see. Next slide, please. And this was a report we did this year, and it relates to Toronto Police Service. And Chief Raymer said that, you know, some of these recommendations were really good, and that, you know, he identified areas that he thought really needed to be rectified, and that they're going to move in that direction. So, you know, including the police this year in the cybersecurity was an excellent idea, and we've completed that. Next slide, please. Now, being fair and balanced, it's super important. You know, to be fair and balanced, we mean being independent, being objective, no surprises, you know, helping to work through. I think trying to understand, seeking to understand, keep making sure that we're fierce with the issues, but not to be feared with people. I mean, really making sure that we're open so that people can come to us if they have a concern and they're willing to work with us to get to the best solution. I can say that public service really here at the City of Toronto really does work. We've seen, next slide please, we've seen a culture shift. Management is implementing recommendations. And I think in the last 4 years, I've seen a big shift in almost exciting and grabbing hold of these and running with them. There's a culture shift moving towards faster outcomes. As you'll see in our report, next slide please, you're going to see purple boxes. You're going to see things to show that management's not only waiting to act, they're acting in the same year. This is another, and I'm just going to stop here for a moment. When we talk about culture shift, look at all the changes that Forestry has done. It's been super, and it's difficult, you know, to be audited. We're audited. It's always a challenge to get that diagnosis, but once people have that and they're running with it, I know that it's been a tough year for Forestry, and but they've really come through. And you know, the general manager Janie Romoff has said, it's provided a constructive opportunity to improve tree maintenance, and it's helped with their continuous improvement. So you only get that kind of response when you're trying to work with the organization. Next slide, please. You'll see Forestry show up in our purple boxes this year because they didn't. Purple boxes mean you're acting within the same year. And Forestry did that along with many other divisions within the City of Toronto. So I'm very excited about that. Next slide, please. And in building on our international award last year, where we were shown as honored to be have one of the best, most impactful performance audits with the TTC, we continue to show leadership. It's really important. Toronto is a world-class city, and it's important to have world-class public service and a world-class Auditor General's office. And so we really do try to make sure that we live up to the reputation. We're being asked to present at conferences. We're having our people poached, so there's a lot of leadership, I think, being shown, implementing new systems, new ways of doing things. I have, you know, people come to our office and say, we've not seen that done before. So it's, you know, very important, and we're still leading. Last slide, please. So overall, in summary, we believe we're adding value. We're being fair and balanced in our approach, and that's resulting, I think, in management really not only just implementing, they would do that anyway, but they really do try to work with their office to try to do the best for the citizens of Toronto. And there's a positive return to the city of $14.9 per dollar invested. And so second last, I'd like to just turn to this last slide here. And, you know, I don't produce these results alone. You know, really, we spoke before, it takes a village. And I'd really sincerely like to thank my team. These professionals show up every day. They show up, they work hard. They've worked into the wee hours of the morning when something has to be delivered. They meet deadlines all the time. And they do it because they feel that they make a difference in an affordable housing unit, in the life of a child, in a homeless person, in the dollars that city management can use to support whatever programs that they wish to do. So I think that it's been a really amazing year and a really amazing term. And, you know, and what's most touching for me in this process is that we have a very diverse group. We speak 14 languages. We work together exceptionally well. We celebrate marriages. We share in happiness with babies. We have so many babies being born. We have a very young office, and we share our cultural traditions, and that just unifies us together. So I have to say, I have a debt of gratitude to my entire team. But finally, I can't leave without saying that the real heroes for me in this term have been those frontline workers. You know, we look at those areas where we need to make improvements, and we do it based on risk, but we don't miss the fact that we are safer because of the work that the frontline workers do each year. So, and through this entire pandemic. So I want to thank them also. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you, committee, for listening to this presentation.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General, and thank you to your entire team. And I'm glad you put that slide up at the end. I think that was a great page of your report. I will ask members of council if they have questions of the Auditor General. Councillor Ford, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think I'm kind of breaking the rules here, but I'm going to just make a quick comment before my questions. Is I love how the Auditor General consistently, I know this time, but in every report always thanks her staff, gives them the attention they deserve, and let them present to committee. And you know what? I think they've done a phenomenal job. So I just, just to say that, I think that's true leadership.
I'm going to interrupt you, Councillor Ford, to say I fully agree, and I'm looking forward to the day that we head back to in-person meetings, because I always know that there was a team in the room, and it's through virtual you don't get to see the faces as familiar as we did in traditional meetings, and I think it's great that they were there and participating in the meeting, but I will apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to make that point that I missed them.
I welcome the instruction, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Beverly. So off to the questions. So just I got two here. First, I think, again, actually about you and your team and moving forward. And I think I've heard this question a number of times. The capacity you have within the Auditor General's office to do work. You've said that you've accomplished 14 audits. I think it's within the year, correct? Or
Correct.
Since 20, yeah, within the year.
Correct.
There's a lot of stuff going on in the city of Toronto. There's a lot of challenges to meet as we continue to evolve, and challenges, will always be there for us to deal with. Right now we're investing. We've invested 31.2 million in your office over the last 5 years. And we do know you are departing. What's your advice to council on how to, fund your office moving forward, or doesn't necessarily have to be fund, but support the work that you do?
Thank you for the question. I at this stage, I do believe that the bucket of funding we have is sufficient for the office at this time. And to move forward for a few years. I think we have what we need. I think to make the biggest difference is really what we're seeing right now. We have a symbiotic relationship such that management is open for the culture shift. So whereas when you have change and new programs, you're going to have some things fall through the crack, but the long-term permanent impact relates to a culture shift where you're grabbing it and moving forward and building on it. And I can say TTC would be an example where they're taking the audit recommendations, but then they're going further. Within the city, I mean, as I'm looking at the Forestry results, as they're working on those, we're looking at the cybersecurity, the culture, even with Lou de Geronimo, the culture shift and change to say we're in a new world, it's different now, and being willing to change. The best way I think you can support the office is to support that relationship. We're independent, but we also need to change. And if you have that culture shift, you're going to have a long-term, change within the city. So it's exciting to see over this term for sure.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of dig into that, is there, or kind of what work has your office done? Because I know there's, your office, there's also internal audit, which, I've done some work with here and there, but how do we create that culture, and what work have we done to date on a proactive culture around this stuff?
I think honestly, it starts, I think, with the perspective of the Auditor General. I feel that my work, the work and the role is important, but I'm no more important than anybody else. And I feel that it's a team effort to be able to make lasting change. And, I think that being open for understanding and being open to listen and to be understanding that we are here to help, believe it or not, we are here to help. I think that keeping that relationship going is going to be really important. And from like the Auditor General's perspective, I think, you only deliver through people. I said to the first city manager that when a report hits the clerk's office and it goes into the press, that's not my deliverable. My deliverable is if change happens. And the only way I can make change happen is if you maintain a relationship and you worked, once the findings are there, support management and making sure that they can implement is really important. So, you know, I think there's a perspective of the Auditor General. I think it's a perspective of the city management. I mean, I think that they come and I think that they're more open and really trying to make change and listen to and implement the recommendations. And it's the change of this committee. So there's lots of dynamics. I think it's just having the right personality there, and I think it's important.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have one more question, but I know my time's up.
It's okay. I took up some of your time, so go ahead.
So just quickly, I know one of the things I've been paying close attention to is the work around Toronto Police Service and the audits going on. I know you've completed the cybersecurity thing. I know you have more work to do with Toronto Police. Just quick, how's that progressing?
It's progressing extremely well. We plan to deliver 2 by June. 2 audits, which is quite a lot. And there, I have to say, there's been a heavy lift because we're dealing with sensitive information around 911, and there had to be information protocols in place. But my team has been working constantly for this entire year, and we are ready to deliver in June. So you'll have some good information then.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Nunziata, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at your report on 27 about the savings. As you know, we talked about it previously in the budget on when the various departments bring forward their budget to identify on, as far as the auditor recommendations, the potential savings as part of their budget. So if you can tell me, is that being realized, and is that working?
I thank you, Councillor, for that question and for that suggestion. And it is working. And I feel that it's really tightened up and really had both sides really look at the numbers. So I think that's very important. The challenge is always not everything shows up in the budget, like the cost avoidance for the long-term disability, but it does force us to, it does force both management and the Auditor General to make sure that we can identify how it's tracked, and so whether it's in the cost avoidance or where it's at within the budget. So I think it's been a very good initiative, and I think it's something that needs to continue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I suspect Councillor Matlow, you wish to speak. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll start with the motion, just to put it up in front of you. And it's, to paraphrase myself, it's essentially just asking the Auditor General to consider putting into her work plan the performance of snow clearing along with the events of January 17th. And I'm going to speak sort of in general to the Auditor General's work and then go right into the motion. So first of all, I just want to, I was saving my comments rather than joining in with the interruptions earlier to concur with everything that was said by Councillor Ford and Councillor Holiday. Beverly, if I may speak directly to you, your style is collaborative. It's, you're able to work with staff and see performance improve because of the way that you approach and the way that you work with people rather than at people, and the team spirit in which you work as well within your own office. And I just, I really appreciated how you acknowledged that the work that your staff does, and I know I feel the same way about my team, and I imagine my colleagues feel the same way about their teams, is that it's not just a job, right? We're there to make people's lives better, and there are all sorts of ways to do that. But it really is a calling, when you take public service seriously. And I really appreciate how you've done your job. And then to the substance, I really appreciate what you've done with your work, because I'm repeating myself, I know, but I've told you all my very honest account of how I ended up on this committee in the first place. And I was just dumped into this committee by Rob Ford, with all due respect, Michael. Because it just seemed like, well, I didn't ask for it. So therefore, if you're not, one of my allies in council, you're going to be stuck with it. And that really was kind of how it started. And what I discovered is that I really appreciated being on this committee, that, even that rhetoric and hyperbole about gravy trains, remember from years ago, like, if you actually understand what that means, like, is there waste in government? Are there genuine efficiencies that can be found? Are there better ways to provide public service? Well, this is the committee to do that at, to really understand, how do you make government work better? How do you use every dollar that was earned by somebody else who we're entrusted with? How do you use that dollar better? And how do you make sure that it's not wasted? And also, how do you make sure that it's not used inappropriately, or defrauded? So for all those different reasons, this committee is all about making City Hall work better. And the work that you do and your team does makes City Hall work better for the people who we serve. So speaking of investments, I'm convinced that every dollar we've invested into the work you and your team does has paid off in dividends. And I really appreciate the work you've done. On the motion itself, as you all know, the reason that I emphasized sort of the concerns that I think many of us share at council recently about the recent snow clearing performance is because, it took, again, after a few days, I think all of us understand that a large amount of snowfall will take longer to clear. And then it became a week, and then it became 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and now it's like a month, and we're still just completing many of the streets, which I don't have a reasonable answer to why that is. But even within, and I imagine I'm not alone, I look to my colleagues, but I imagine I'm not alone in the feedback that I heard from my residents about how Plow TO, ironically, that was set up to give reassurance to people so that they would not contact our offices or call 311, ended up being like a source of frustration for people, because they would look on Plow TO and it would suggest that work had been done on their street, but then they look out their own window and that wasn't true. And I heard that repeatedly, which made me think about our experience with the tree pruning. I'm not suggesting I know that that's the case, but I think it's a reasonable question. In other words, what we're expecting from our contractors, was that really playing out in real life on the streets and sidewalks of Toronto? Moreover, I heard anecdotally several stories of plows sitting on streets for hours at a time without moving, and I want to understand why that would be, if that's true. And I didn't hear that just from one resident, I heard that repeatedly, which makes me, I'm convinced that there's something to it, and I want us to understand that. Ultimately, with respect to standards, our expectations, residents' expectations, we need clarity about that, because there sure isn't any clarity even in the pamphlets that are sent out to residents proactively. And in fact, I would suggest that the literature that's shared with residents set unrealistic expectations of what we were able to do in different types of scenarios and degrees of centimeters. So for, with respect to just clarity of expectations, understanding of what standards are being set based on how many centimeters of snowfall at any given period of time. Also, cumulative effects of snowfall. In other words, it may be only 8 centimeters one day and 8 centimeters 2 days later, but once it accumulates, what are our expectations and standards when there's cumulative snowfall rather than just a massive 55 centimeter event like we had on the 17th, I understand. All in all, it was a mess. Like, it was just, what it means in real life is that people's mobility and safety and accessibility was severely impacted for an egregious amount of time in a Canadian city that does get snow every winter, which doesn't make sense to the average person. And looking at the chair's watch, I recognize that I need to wrap it up. So what I'm asking for in a nutshell is for the Auditor General to investigate and provide recommendations, because while I appreciate that there will be a post-operational report, I don't think that should be solely left in the hands of the very staff who should be accountable to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow.
Thank you.
I gave you a little extra time because
I appreciate it.
you
I could
spent
go
the
on for
beginning
hours about this subject, so I appreciate you signaling to me to wrap it up.
You made nice compliments at the start, so we won't count that time.
Thanks.
I'll look to my committee member colleagues if there is anyone else wishing to speak, and if you can be patient with me because of the view on the screen, I don't see your hands. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, Councillor Ford, please go ahead.
Very briefly, and yes, Mr. Chair, that view is stuck on my screen as well. Oh, there we go. So, Mr. Chair, I'll be brief. So first off, with Councillor Matlow's motion, I know the mayor is, asked for that review, came to council a few weeks ago. I'm okay to support that motion from an audit lens as well. It is, asking the AG to consider it. So as long as that works well with the other work that's going on that, I'm good with that. So I'm happy to support that. And then, as I said earlier, I'll say it again, I think the Auditor General's Office has done fantastic work. Like Councillor Matlow, I think I was put on this committee by Mayor Tory.
Oh, the irony.
I know. But, the previous mayor did take accountability and transparency to heart. So, Councillor Matlow, I'm sure he held you in high regard to put you on this committee. But we're moving on. So, the Auditor General has done great work. And in my last 5 years on this committee, I've seen, exceptional reports, beyond exceptional reports come through. And the difference these reports have made have been of significant impact in many different ways, shapes, and forms. So, if there is, I think, well, we always have to turn our mind to this. If there's a way of, in the future, broadening the scope of the AG, investing more in the Auditor General's Office, or whatever host of ways we can to broaden that scope, I think it's an investment worthwhile. And, Mr. Chair, I'll wrap up my comments there. And thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ford. Councillor Fillion?
Yes, just to piggyback on some of the previous remarks, I was banished to this committee by Mayor Tory, and as it turns out, I am quite grateful to him for that.
Thanks, Councillor Fillion. Councillor Nunziata?
I think I was put on by Mayor Ford.
A point of privilege, just with respect to the reputation of this committee. For the record, since the time that I was banished here, I have consistently formally requested to come back, and I just want to make that very, very clear.
And it was my top choice, so
Well,
I'll make the brief comment. My colleagues on the committee have spoken quite nicely and complimentary of the Auditor General, and it's well deserved. But my very brief story about why I recognize the value of the Auditor General's Office. Many reports have passed through, as we've talked about, that have executed change. But one that stands out to me is the fire and life safety audits. And the reason I say this is because, a while ago, I was having a conversation with somebody in the industry, somebody that works with systems. And they talked about the changes at City of Toronto and how that changed the industry and how things changed where they worked. And they have nothing to do with politics and probably don't follow the news in the same way that somebody in the political circle would. So they're kind of like arm's length. So, there's layers, right, to the effective audits. There's dollars that get found and saved. There's public confidence. There's, stopping or starting something that, was a problem or needs to be done. And then there is, real change that happens in other municipalities, maybe that are watching us or through international headlines. And then the biggest effect is this, which is like a change in the industry. Like this is change stuff for people that have no relationship with the city of Toronto, but have a relationship with a service company. And and what does it mean? It's more than savings. It means like people's lives being safer. So I'm very grateful. I mean, that's just one report that I just came to my head. But the point to make about leadership and impact of the Auditor General is that it is huge with respect to its waves, and that's an example of something way out of the reach of our circle that impacted change. So I'm grateful to that, and grateful to the Auditor General and people on staff that made those changes. So thank you, and we should all recognize and reflect those examples. So with that, may I take a vote at this time on the amendment from Councillor Matlow? All those in favor? Any opposed? And on the staff recommendations, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. We'll move on to AU 11.2, which is the Auditor General's 2021 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Madam Auditor General, you have a brief presentation for us, and I will turn the microphone to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm going to ask Elaine Au and Sean McIntosh to let you know what they've been working on for the past year.
Thank you, Auditor General, and good morning, members of Audit Committee. Today's presentation on the 2021 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline will cover 3 items. First, we will look at key statistics and beyond the numbers. Then we will go over 4 major investigation reports issued in 2021. And finally, we will briefly mention some communication initiatives that we have planned for 2022. Next slide, please. The graphics on this slide summarize the key statistics for the year. There are 3 areas I will focus your attention to. Beginning with the top row, we received 820 complaints, representing approximately 1,200 allegations in 2021. This is similar to our 2020 volume, with just a 3% decrease, and it represents a 40% increase over the volume we received in 2019. Complaint activity may go up or down because of the dynamic nature of the hotline and as a result of various factors, including outreach activities and the nature of issues reported by the media. In terms of the source of complaints, this year, the majority of complaints, which is about 40%, were received through the secure online form, which is directly integrated with our case management system. We also received 23% of complaints through telephone call to the hotline, which is answered by an independent call center. The remaining complaints were received through other sources such as emails or referrals. Another key statistic is that our office conducted preliminary investigative inquiries on 72% of the complaints that we received, and preliminary inquiries are expected to be conducted on the remaining cases. The bottom half of the slide outlines some of the outcomes and impacts of the hotline. Of the 90 complaints that were investigated in 2021, 17% were substantiated, and this percentage will increase as 2021 complaints continue to be concluded in 2022. It is also important to note that 40% of the substantiated complaints were anonymous. Our system allows complainants to communicate with us anonymously and therefore brings even more confidence in our process. In terms of the nature of substantiated complaints, Exhibit 3 of our annual report provides selected summaries of complaints concluded in 2021, and they include various types ranging from public safety concerns to misuse of city funding and also vendor contract issues. This year, we have summarized 14 complaints, and they can be found in Exhibit 3 of the report. At the very bottom of the slide, you can see the actual loss for 2021 substantiated complaints was $227,000, with a cumulative total of $28.2 million over the last 5 years. These amounts are also expected to increase as outstanding complaints are closed in 2022. The actual loss represents the dollar value lost by the city as a result of substantiating fraud or other wrongdoing that was reported through the hotline. And finally, in the bottom right-hand corner, it is also important to mention that we've resolved and closed a total of 743 complaints in 2021. The majority of the complaints closed were related to 2021, but we also closed an additional 307 cases that were related to previous years. And of those 307 complaints from previous years, 35 of those cases were substantiated or substantiated in part. This shows that the forensic unit manages complaints until completion, which due to the volume and complexity of cases is not always in the years they are received. There are other impacts of the Hotline program beyond the numbers, including the detection and prevention of fraud. This will be discussed more on the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Discipline acts as a deterrent to wrongdoing, and in 2021, for the 15 substantiated complaints, 4 employees were disciplined, and there were 11 cases of other appropriate action taken by management, including, for example, the termination of ineligible subsidies. This shows that when hotline complaints are received, the city takes action. Another impact is information gathering. Collecting data on complaints is important for several reasons. First, it can help to identify trends in data that may point to systemic issues. Secondly, complaint data is also one of the factors considered that may result in an audit being conducted. For example, the audit of improving software license subscription tracking, utilization, and compliance that was tabled in 2021 was initiated in part due to complaint data from the hotline. Gathering information also helps us to identify areas that may require proactive monitoring. Other benefits of the hotline include strengthening internal controls, improving operational efficiencies, and increased deterrence and detection of fraud and wrongdoing. As you know, the impact of fraud is more than just financial losses. It can damage the morale of employees and negatively impact the city's reputation. Also, significant management time is required to conduct investigations. Therefore, having the hotline as a deterrent is an important tool to fight fraud. Next slide, please. Not only did we process 820 complaints this year, we also concluded 4 major investigations that resulted in reports being issued to Audit Committee. The first report issued was an accounts payable fraud investigation at Toronto business improvement areas. The Auditor General reviewed 2 BIAs and made 3 important recommendations in this report to reduce the risk of fraud at other BIAs and city organizations. The second report issued was related to the Auditor General's review of the Corporate Real Estate Management Division on challenges in contract management. There were 19 recommendations made in this report to improve invoice payment, contract management, and procurement practices, which support the division's ongoing transformation in this area. Next slide, please. The third report was an investigation into allegations of reprisal regarding a former employee whose position was terminated. The Auditor General concluded there was insufficient evidence found to substantiate that the former employee was a subject of reprisal. No further action was recommended in this report. And lastly, the fourth report issued was a result of agreed upon procedures to assess controls over pay and display credit card revenues. The report presented the Auditor General's consideration of risks raised over pay and display revenues at the Toronto Parking Authority and provided recommendations to strengthen internal controls. Next slide, please. Finally, I would like to briefly mention our planned communication initiatives for 2022. Last year, we had limited outreach activities due to a backlog of complaints. However, looking forward, we are going to undertake an educational campaign to raise awareness on employee responsibility to report wrongdoing to our office, as is required under the Toronto Public Service Bylaw. This will include reinforcing the City Council directed message from 2018 that staff should report any allegations of potential wrongdoing involving city resources, including potential wrongdoing against the city by third-party vendors. In addition, we will continue to inform, encourage, and remind members of the public and employees about the usefulness of the Fraud and Waste Hotline program. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation for the 2021 annual report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Thank you for your time, and we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll ask if there are members of the committee with questions. Seeing none, thank you. Any members of the committee wishing to speak? May I take a motion to move the staff recommendations, please? Councillor Matlow, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you.
By the way, with a quick thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Understood. Thank you to the entire audit team, because I know that it takes the entire team to deal with the volume of complaints. So I appreciate it.
It does. Thank you very much.
I'll just go to the next item, which is AU 11.4, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, embedding accountability into service delivery, lessons learned from the audit of contracted property management services. Councillor Ford, you had held the item. However, Madam Auditor, I believe you have a brief presentation for the committee.
There is a brief presentation, and I kindly ask my Deputy Auditor General, Ina Chan, to present this report, and she was the lead on it. It's a very short presentation.
Thank you, Auditor General. I'm joined by my colleague, Elaine Liu, who led the project. Before we begin, I think it's important to take a second to orient you to the importance of this report. We recognize that TCHC is transforming how it is providing service to its residents, including transitioning the entire contract managed portfolio back in-house. But what's important about our report is that our findings focus on lessons learned from our audit that can be applied going forward to service delivery across TCHC's entire portfolio, regardless of whether service is delivered by a contracted property manager, a vendor, or TCHC's own staff. The recommendations, while identified in the context of an audit of the contract managed portfolio, can be more broadly applied for TCHC's continuous improvement, and we're pleased that management's response reflects their consideration of our recommendations from that perspective. Next slide, please. So as background, in 2015 and 16, the Mayor's Task Force on Toronto Community Housing was tasked with examining how TCHC serves the people of Toronto and how it was governed, with the goal of the task force to recommend to the Mayor what adjustments to governance and operation of TCHC were necessary to improve service to its residents. So when we started our audit in the second half of 2019, before TCHC started bringing buildings back under its direct management, we began to see that the same things that were raised in the Mayor's Task Force report still needed to be addressed, and many of our findings in our report were not new. The task force made a number of recommendations like developing and implementing an action plan to improve building conditions, address tenant satisfaction concerns, and improve quality of service, as well as adopting clear performance standards to ensure equity in tenant services across all buildings in the portfolio, and then establishing effective performance measurement to track performance and to regularly monitor performance with metrics. We reviewed the recommendations and TCHC's action plan and found that while TCHC management at that time had made commitments to change and ensure that residents living in contract property managed buildings received the same service as expected at direct managed buildings, they said they would do this by adopting stronger contracts with clearly well-defined measurable performance expectations, having a clear set of KPIs and accountabilities for the delivery work, and continuously and rigorously monitoring quality of work and vendor performance. However, based on our audit, it is our view that many of these changes and improvements did not fully materialize in practice. And there was a gap in TCHC's getting it done, implementing the real change the management had committed to at that time. So next slide, please. The lessons learned from this audit that can be applied going forward for continuous improvement for oversight, monitoring, and management of service delivery across the entire portfolio are: 1, setting up successful service delivery with clear, consistent performance expectations and measures; 2, monitoring performance to hold service providers accountable for quality; and 3, building trust and confidence through accurate, transparent, data-driven reporting on actions taken. Next slide, please. So in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to speak really quickly on what we saw, but not go into the detail because that's in the report, and we presented on this to TCHC's Audit Committee, and it is in the report. But on the face of the slides are what TCHC has committed to going forward. So TCHC's goals for real change were to provide residents consistently good service no matter where they live. And what we found in our audit of the contracted property managed buildings was that technical specifications and service requirements for the direct managed buildings and contract managed buildings were not consistent. TCHC was not tracking and monitoring all of the KPIs in the contract, and there needed to be better performance measures to improve service delivery, particularly around the quality of service performed and tenant satisfaction. As TCHC moves forward with its transformation and decentralizes decision-making to local service hubs across the city, and as it transitions in-house the contract managed portfolio, our recommendations for TCHC are to set clear and consistent service expectations. So staff responsible for each TCHC building has a consistent understanding of what is required. This will need to be a fundamental aspect of the accountability framework going forward. We also recommended establishing measures or KPIs that support desired outcomes, specifically around quality of routine repairs and maintenance, adherence to preventative maintenance standards, and improving of tenant satisfaction. Effectively measuring and monitoring to improve service delivery and performance requires high quality data. This means that all staff need to have a consistent understanding of what information to capture, making sure that that information is captured, and then analyzing it to identify key trends and risks to take action to improve. Next slide, please. The next lesson learned is around the TCHC goal for change around continuously and rigorously monitoring performance. This is something that for years TCHC management has told tenants, the board, and council that TCHC was working on. In our audit of the contracted property managed portfolio, we found that TCHC's oversight and monitoring was not sufficient. Often it was reactive rather than proactive, often relying on tenant complaints to identify if there were quality or performance concerns. There were insufficient records to show proper monitoring and inspection that the inspection of work was occurring, and there's a need for better tracking of performance issues to be able to escalate and hold the service providers accountable. So our recommendations going forward are for more robust processes to monitor and verify that expenses are valid, that work is completed in accordance with specifications and is of sufficient quality, and that contracts represent value for money. We also made recommendations for periodic internal or other independent reviews to confirm that this is happening and that TCHC is on solid footing each step of the way as they continue forward and take direct control of their buildings, as well as in pushing down responsibility to the tenant service hub. Next slide, please. And the third lesson learned is just that in moving forward, even as TCHC looks to bring property management back in-house and continues to transform service delivery, is to make sure that it has reliable information systems in place that bring forward accurate and that they can bring forward accurate and transparent information on the state of affairs and actions on areas that need continuous improvement. Accurate, data-driven information transparently communicated to the board and council is going to be key for continuous improvement and decision-making and accountability for delivering on improved outcomes, so that the tenants, the board, and council know that when TCHC says they're going to do it, it will get done. Next slide, please. Looking forward, we believe that TCHC knows what needs to be in practice for consistently good service at all of its buildings, making sure all of its staff have clear and consistent performance requirements, strengthening oversight and monitoring to make sure services are performed and work is completed with quality, and making sure it's gathering the quality data it needs to make decisions on continuous improvement. Last slide, please. So there's 10 recommendations in the report that are designed to assist TCHC going forward. Management has agreed with all of the 10 recommendations, are actively working on them, and their action plan can be found in the appendix report. We appreciate the cooperation and assistance we received from TCHC management and staff, especially because the audit was happening amidst this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Councillor Ford held the item. I'll go to him for questions first, and then we've got Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions on this talk, so I'll just start. Is TCHC on the line? Because I think more of my questions.
Yeah, Councillor Ford, sorry to interrupt. Yes, the CEO is, I believe, is on the line.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Speaker. So I want to start off with TCHC. I was on the board a few years ago for a while. TCHC went through a big restructuring at that time of how management was structured and everything. And I remember the board considering at that time that would make a big difference into a lot of these recommendations, which we knew existed at that time. What came out of that restructuring at that moment in time? What successes came out of it, I should say?
Just checking with Madam Clerk, do we have an audio issue for the connection?
Through the chair, I could assist to begin with. I know our chief, it's Jag Sharma, the CEO, but I know our chief operating officer is on as well. Thank you for the question, Councillor Ford. The restructuring plan has been designed in order to put approximately 88 service hubs in place at this point in order to bring the services closer to our tenants. And it's not just it's a combined level of service between our tenant service providers, from a cleaning perspective, a community safety perspective, so a holistic approach with those hubs in the communities, as opposed to the original structure where the services were much more head office led. And so that change has led to improving the time in which our tenants require in order to achieve service, as well as the other objective we're looking to do is to ensure that there's a better relationship between our tenants and our frontline staff, and finally to empower our frontline staff to get the job done when our tenants are requesting service. So those hubs are materially in place now. Some of them are in temporary locations as a result of some of the challenges of the pandemic, but we are well on our way to having that restructuring plan in place with, of course, that motivation.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to page 23 of the report, and I think this is appropriate for the AG's office, but please feel free, Mr. Sharman, to jump in whenever. So on page 23 in the middle, it says, it's not possible to assess TCHC as paying more for services in contract managed buildings. And that is a big topic of conversation when you talk about contracting out, is value for money. Can the private sector do it better to help us save money and we reinvest? Why isn't it possible here to really do a deeper dive into the value of contract managed versus not?
Thank you, Councillor, and I will I'll refer to my Deputy Auditor General. But I think at this stage, what's happened here is the Mayor's Task Force recommendations were great. We actually didn't find anything that we could recommend beyond in this area of contract managed property, so that was great. The challenge is the records, the expectations, the tracking to demonstrate the value that was received compared to the value now is hard because the records, the systems were not adequate. And the reason this report is important is that as you move into the new structure, which is going to appears is going to bring added value, we want to make sure there's a solid step. And that is, in addition to the structure, make sure the expectations are clear, make sure the data is captured is accurate, and then hold people to account so that you can continue with continuous improvement.
So I just kind of want to dig in on this, because I know, look, being representing North Etobicoke, I'm a number of TCHC buildings that have been contract managed, and I have a number that are done by in-house by Toronto Community Housing. And there's no question that contract managed has been a lot more difficult, and I wouldn't say disastrous, but it has not been easy to work with. That side of it, and TCHC has done a better job. But if these were put into place, what I'm trying to really get at, if we can strengthen accountability with contract management, is it worthwhile in the future to keep, a line, a sight line on that open? That's great.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worthwhile to keep it open. I think the challenge here has been, when you contract something out, whether it be tree maintenance or snowplow operation or contract managed buildings, that you have to make sure that you're holding people to account in order to improve. If nobody's checking or the data isn't accurate, you really don't know where you're at. I mean, I'm sure people were checking, but I'm just saying, our records, the records, it was really very, very challenging. We found a lot of errors. As you move forward with your current model, make sure you have that nailed. Whether it's something to consider going forward, only if those mechanisms are strengthened, and then you can really just go step by step to make sure that you're going to get what you're paying for. Certainly, if somebody comes to do something, you make sure they're doing that job, it's done the way you want to do it, and you're paying the right amount. If those mechanisms aren't in place, you're going to continue to look like you're falling down a bit. So let's tighten that piece, because a lot of great work is being done. And then as you move forward, you're going to have a solid step. Then you can make different choices because your internal mechanisms are the same, whether you contract it out or whether you bring it in. You need this accountability mechanism to be tracking expectations, data, monitoring.
Okay, Councillor Ford, I think we'll do a second round, but I'll give Councillor Nunziata a chance.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Jack, for being here. So, Councillor Ford and members, as you know, that I moved a motion at council about 3 or 4 years ago and looking at all our buildings for the contract buildings and to bring them in-house. And I'll have Jack comment on this. So we have been doing that at the Toronto Housing Board, and most of the buildings in the West End in my ward that were contracted out has been brought in. And we did have a report that came through Toronto Housing just recently on the update on that. So as you know, we're moving towards all our buildings, bringing them in-house on the motion that I moved 3 or 4 years ago. And TCHC is moving on that. So maybe, Jack, you can comment a bit, but that we have gone in-house in most of our buildings, and all the ones in my ward have been done, and we're moving towards the west and then going to the east end of the city, correct?
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Nunziata. That is correct, and I'd invite our COO, Sheila Penny, who's had the first-hand experience with it, to comment as well. We saw a very positive experience with the first transition, and as a result of that, and improving the services delivered to the tenants, the board directed us to move forward with the balance of the portfolio as well. Sheila, do you have anything to add?
So that's correct. We have transitioned all of the contract managed buildings in the west. We have 4 phases for central and east. We've completed the first phase. The last 3 phases will be complete by the 1st of April. And I would say the greatest lesson that we learned through the AG is that we needed a culture shift in the company, that we needed to focus our attention solely on our tenant experience. So by creating the tenant service hubs, as our CEO outlined, we are bringing those core services, all the services that we are responsible to deliver to tenants directly to their location, 88 hubs across the company. And ultimately, our accountability is to our board, to the city, but ultimately to our tenants. And we're setting up a system of evaluation called a service quality indicator. Tenants have told us what good service looks like to them. And we will and are going out to get that feedback from tenants and then work with those subject matter experts, those frontline teams, to put plans in place to address the concerns. And we have completed, I believe, 86 reviews, and we are finding that often tenants' concerns are specific around a topic, and if we can get on top of it and address it, we'll have happy tenants, happy company, happy shareholder. So really focusing in on that tenant experience.
Right. Thank you, Sheila. So as you know, when I moved the motion, I believe it was 4 years ago, because of the complaints I was getting in my ward from contract management in most of my buildings. Now that we've moved in-house, I know that we've received a lot of positive comments from tenants. And as Sheila mentioned, we are expanding that in the various phases. The report, Sheila, that came forward at the board a couple months ago, there was a lot of positive comments from tenants, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to mention that because I wasn't aware if some of the councillors knew what we have been doing at the board as far as contract management and bringing it in-house. And we also received a cost actually that came to the board on that. But I just wanted to update the committee on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other members before we go back to a second round? Seeing none. Councillor Ford, any objections to a second round of questions? Seeing none. Councillor Ford, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll speak through 3 of these. So on tenant complaints, and Sheila, thank you for expanding on that. I think that's very important. I really do think in my time on city council is our tenants know their buildings the best, their homes the best. And we really have to be kind of zoomed in on that. And whether the issues are difficult, not difficult, whatever the case may be. And I know TCAT has been focusing on that. In this report, did the Auditor General's office, what tenant approach should you take to this? Like, I know it's a comprehensive report with different measurements, but how did we speak to tenants? How did we quantify what we heard back into this report? If you can elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Councillor. The focus of the report was looking at the information that was being provided to the board by management to verify that it's accurate. So if it was that the expectations were clear, are they clear? If it's that there's a certain thing happening, what's underneath that? And the focus of this report was with the decisions that have been made now with bringing it in, that's good. We weren't commenting on that at all. All that's good. But we wanted to focus on, as you start to get those management reports, really important that that information is accurate so that you can continue to make continuous improvement. And that's really for the CEO. He's been acting on that since, I think, 3rd day you're on the job, I think, Mr. Charma. And so, you know, so that's the focus of the report. So our report was to look at were the systems working. I'm going to turn to my Deputy Auditor General if there's examples that you can provide on those, for example.
Through the chair, so specifically with your question around tenants, we focused on what is the data that TCAC is collecting? How is that informing monitoring of the performance in those buildings? And so one of the challenges is that there wasn't a consistent data. The quality of the data wasn't as good as it could be, and so because of that, you need to have good data to be able to diagnose an issue and be able to address it. And so the data that was being collected on tenant complaints on buildings, it wasn't consistent, And so it was very difficult to mine and then be able to say, okay, if there's a concern with the building or with performance, then to be able to address it. And what's important moving forward is that TCHC knows the importance of data, and they're putting in systems and processes to be able to mine and collect that data.
So
I'm just going to overlay one more thing. It's also, although tenant complaints is a part of this, a part of the data, the focus of our report was also proactive information before it becomes a systemic issue. So really not the tenant is a piece of it, but what do we know about the state of the building such that we can take action so that complaint doesn't come in, so you can keep the satisfaction up. So we're saying there's been a big policy shift. It looks like it's completely supported. It looks like it's a good thing. As you move forward, put these systems in place, because it's going to keep that improvement going. That's the focus.
No, I get that. It's you know, I think it's kind of like a domino effect if we kind of keep strong records, if we're listening to tenants, and I really hope that comes out of this back to the TCHC board. And again, I know they're focusing on that, but I just think it's a real stress I'd like to stress that. Two more questions, Mr. Chair. Preventative maintenance. So, you know, I know this is a lot about, you know, responding and working with contractors and whatnot. So as we bring it in-house, are we strengthening, what's the plan to strengthen preventative maintenance so it shouldn't really get to the tenants to escalate and whatnot?
Through you,
Chair. Oh, sorry. After you, Sheila.
through you, Mr. Chair, we have a strong preventive maintenance program in the direct managed portfolio. Under the contract managed arrangements, the contract managed teams were responsible for providing preventive maintenance. We did do a deep dive into the preventive maintenance services provided, and with the new model, our current vendors that are responsible for preventive maintenance in the direct managed portfolio are assuming preventive maintenance in the contract managed buildings as they come back in, and will apply the same rigor in understanding service delivery, PM service delivery uniformly across the portfolio.
Okay.
And if I may add, through the chair, I think as the Auditor General had indicated, that there needs to be clarity in order to manage that relationship with any contractor. And as Ms. Penny's indicated, there's a substantial, at least we determined that there was a substantial difference between what was being done in the contract managed buildings and how we were managing the portfolio. So we expect to see a significant improvement as they migrate into the portfolio, back into the organization.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Any other questions? Seeing none, any members wishing to speak? Councillor Ford, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the committee members for the indulgence. I'll be quick on my comments. This is something that since, you know, the first day I got elected, actually been running for office. This has been, you know, a big thing to all the tenants and people who live in TCHC around the maintenance of their buildings and whatnot. And I think it goes to the, and I know, and just to say, I know Sheila, you know, has done a great job when she took over in an interim role in a lot of that stuff. And I know Mr. Sharma, when we spoke a little while back, when you came in, it was the #1 priority for you. So I thank you for that. So, you know, I think accountability when we contract out is very important, and it's always has been important. And as one member of council, you know, I speak to a lot of tenants on a daily basis around maintenance and whatnot. So that, you know, if we can strive to do the best job we can in staying on top of that, I really think that it is noticeable to tenants. I think the proof is in the pudding, as Councillor Nunziata said, between when we brought stuff in-house, that we have more control over it, tenants' satisfaction went up. So it definitely, there's runway there, and I just want to thank the Auditor General and her team, Ms. Chan, for all your work and in bringing this forward, and hope good stuff comes out of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, just briefly, and thank you, Councillor Ford, and thank you to Jag and Sheila. You're absolutely correct, and that's why I had issues, because I have a number of TCHC buildings in my ward that were contracted out, and what I got constantly from tenants complaining about the maintenance and, you know, the urine and, you know, filthy. Some of our buildings were absolutely filthy. These were the contracted buildings. And so, and that was the reason why I put that motion through, because I was getting so many complaints, and it was only from the buildings that were contracted out in my ward. So now I'm not getting the complaints that I did before. And I want to thank the staff for that. But, you know, previously it was so difficult. The number of calls that were coming in from tenants, it's just a matter of just, you know, cleaning the floors or washing the floors, or, you know, the graffiti and some of the, you know, people urinating in the elevators, in the stairway, and, you know, never being cleaned, you know, that sort. It was disgusting. And I did tour all the buildings in my ward, and with TCHC staff. And, you know, it was definitely, like, it was a huge issue. And so, you know, and I'm glad that we're moving in the right direction, and it has been very positive. So thank you to staff, and thank you to the auditor. You know, it is working. It is working. Slowly, we're getting there.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak? I will say briefly that I suspect every councillor is not a stranger to concerns that are brought to them about the condition of a building, or even more importantly, just a simple issue that a tenant is trying to deal with. And I will say, by the way, the council liaison staff that work with councillors' offices at TCHC are excellent, and you should know that, Mr. Sharma. And I appreciate the work that they do, and they help deliver results. But yeah, you know, it's expected to hear concerns from time to time about individual issues. You know, I remember vividly one conversation about someone who showed me that their door didn't lock, and all they wanted was their front door to lock. But more alarming is when the conversation switches to it's the service provider, in their opinion, or they need a different service provider. And it shouldn't matter to a tenant. And that's the conversation that I draw the circle around, right? You know, the process can work to get a result, but then when a deeper opinion goes in about who's delivering it, then you realize that something larger is not working. And so I'm appreciative of this report, because it builds systems around the monitoring of performance. What do you know? Contract management, once again, which has been a discussion of this meeting. And also, what Ms. Penny talked about is a client-centered approach. At the end of the day, it should work, and it should be anticipated that issues will come up, but it should be as simple as, can you just get my front door fixed? Because I don't care who does it. Just get it done. And you know, those are the issues that can be tackled head on. So I'm very much appreciative of the work. I think they will build systems in place, and I think they will leave an open door for the future about whether or not services are contracted in or out. It shouldn't matter, as long as it's done efficiently, and as long as it's meeting the tenant's needs. So, you know, I look forward to that, and I thank everyone for their work. So on that, on the staff recommendations, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. A couple of quick housekeeping items. It did come to my attention that the item on forestry, although we talked about it in the debate about adding a motion in council regarding contract management, That item does not go to council, so I'm going to propose a reopening. I think Councillor Fillion has a motion to add to that, which would require a future report. So I'm going to put it before the committee. All those in favor of reopening the item, Julie, if you can help me here, I think it is AU 11.8, getting to the root of the issues, second performance update of urban forestry contractors and city crews, and consolidated summary and analysis of 2021 forestry operations related complaints. Thank you. So that passes. There are no questions. I think no speeches. I think Councillor Fillion, you wanted to move a motion.
Yes, thank you. And I think the clerks have it. And it follows from the discussion we had about whether the spot checks that are being done could be extrapolated to provide wider cost recovery. So getting a report from staff on that. And if that's the case, at council could consider whether it wants to take a similar approach with other contracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that amendment carries. So therefore, on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. Madam Clerk, I think I've done the required votes and that item is complete. If you could confirm.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask my colleague Brad actually to re-show that motion because Councillor Fillion had just made just two quick changes to add tree maintenance contracts just to specify the contracts. So if we could just put that on the screen again, just to ensure that that small revision from Councillor Fillion is captured. And it shows up there just in the second last sentence in the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Just again, doing a little bit of housekeeping with respect to the agenda. I do believe, bear with me as I operate this electronic system, that we have two items left. AU 11.6, which is the status of governance framework for effective cybersecurity management, which we know contains confidential attachments. My suspicion is that we would require an in-camera opportunity to ask questions. And there's AU 11.10, which is City of Toronto Audit Planning Report for the year ended December 31st, 2021. If there are no objections, I'm going to propose that we consider AU 11.10 right now. So reorder the paper. I believe there's a brief presentation on this matter, and then we will go to AU 11.6 so that we may process that item continuously. I think we can get this done before lunch, and if we need to, unless anyone objects, we may need a few extra minutes to deal with that matter. So if there's anyone objecting to that procedure forward, I don't think so. Okay, so we will move to AU 11.10, which is the City of Toronto Audit Planning Report for the year ended December 31st, 2021. And I believe there's a presentation. Mr. Travers, I think you would be speaking to this.
Yes, thank you. I think Clerks is going to bring up the document for us. Thanks. And thanks, Brad. If you could move simply to the executive summary. So the comments I'll make today will be, very brief. This is quite a complex document. We're going to speak to the executive summary, and then certainly we will be happy to respond to questions. This is the first of two formal communications that we have with this committee. The second, of course, will be when we come back in the late spring, early summer to present our findings from conducting the audit itself. This is in reference to the audit of the financial statements of the City of Toronto for the year ending December 31st, 2021. The document itself contains a number of specific items that we're required to comment on, including our setting of materiality for the audit of the financial statements. Materiality is calculated in the same manner that we did in the prior year. And materiality is the value to which, if we had uncorrected differences that approach that number, we would have a difficult time signing an unqualified audit opinion. That being said, we do encourage management to book any differences that we may note, and we would bring to this committee's attention any corrected or uncorrected audit differences that were noted during the course of the audit itself. The audit plan also includes information regarding where we consider to be the requirement for additional audit of areas of focus related to either the risks or just by virtue of the sheer size or quantum of particular items within the financial statements. The document also contains information regarding the planned timelines of the performance of our work, along with, as I mentioned earlier, the key areas for which we intend to focus the efforts. It is a group audit, meaning that in addition to being done at the consolidated level, we also perform audit work on a number of the agencies and commissions itself for standalone audits. The more significant components are listed on this deck or in this page as well. So within the document itself, it provides additional information on the areas that we've touched on, including the details surrounding the calculation materiality, as well as specific areas of focus that we intend to focus our work on. So with that, and we'll make our, as I said earlier, we're going to fulfill our promise of keeping our comments brief, and we'd be happy to respond to any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Travers. Are there any questions from the committee on the presentation or on the report? Just bear with me because of the nature of the screen here. I just need to scroll. I do not see any, so thank you. Thank you for speaking to us today. Any members wishing to speak to the item? Seeing none, I will move the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And I'll thank you, Mr. Travers and others for your patience as we got to this item. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, last item on the agenda here is AU 11.6, which is the status of governance framework for effective cybersecurity management. Councillor Fillion, you held the item. I'll check. Are there any public questions before we move to consider this item in camera?
I think it's an in-camera question.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay. Madam Clerk, if you can just help me here. I do believe I have to move a motion to go into camera, and I'm going to shuffle through some papers to make sure I get the right wording. And I think you do have to display one on the screen.
That's right, Mr. Chair. So we're just in a process of displaying that motion on the screen. I'll just ask my colleague Brad just to display that. It should just be a moment here.
Mr. Chair, before we go on camera, are we breaking at 12:30?
No, I am going to propose that we keep going. I suspect we'll be able to meet the 12:30 deadline, and unless anyone objects, we can move an extension. Madam Clerk, are there any housekeeping matters related to that we should do before we break? For instance, a motion to complete the item. I'll take your advice on that.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair, we're just displaying the motion to move into closed session, but it might be prudent just for the committee to move a motion to extend its meeting to complete item AU 11.6. Is that your intention, or did you wish to?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
I can move that motion. I don't know if you need to display it, but with the committee's agreement, I will move that we complete AU 11.6 prior, well, just to complete AU 11.6. All those in favor? Any opposed? That item is carried. Thank you, Madam Clerk. And when I am too, I will read the in-camera motion.
So please go ahead, Mr. Chair. So that motion is ready for you to read out loud when you have a chance.
Okay, so I'll follow my instructions here. Members and staff, we have one item that requires a closed session. Only the staff identified as required participants by the city's senior leadership team or Madam Auditor General will participate in the closed session on the various items. Other staff will be placed in the WebEx lobby until their item is considered. If you are disconnected while in the lobby, please reconnect using the same meeting details that you used at the start of the meeting. WebEx may automatically disconnect you after a period of time. Although this process will take time, it will ensure that only the relevant staff are present for the closed session on items, similar to how we handle closed sessions during in-person meetings. I ask everyone for their patience with any delays and technical issues. I will move a motion for the committee to go into closed session on items AU 11.6. I will ask the clerk to display the motion, which is before us here, which I will read aloud. That the Audit Committee recess its public session to meet in closed session to consider this item as it pertains to the security of the property of City of Toronto. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. I will now ask staff to disconnect from the meeting. They are not required for the closed session participant as a closed session participant on item AU 11.6. I would ask the clerk to temporarily close the meeting to members of the public and to only provide access to members and required staff for the closed session portion of this meeting. In addition, the YouTube live stream will be suspended until the closed session is over. Members and staff, I would also remind you to arrange your surroundings so that no other person observes any part of the closed session debate. As I noted earlier, the closed session will be restricted to staff who are identified as required participants by the city's senior leadership team or Madam Auditor General. Senior leadership team staff can speak up now or email auditcommittee@toronto.ca if they have an additional required participant for the closed session on items. We appreciate your patience as the clerk ensures that only members and identified staff are in the closed session.
This is the host of the chair. We're just going to begin moving any non-necessary participants into the lobby. We'll confirm with you when this has been completed. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do we have a few minutes?
Yeah, I can probably arrange for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
How long do you need?
Just a couple of minutes. I just have to.
Okay. I'll keep an eye for you. Come back.
This is the host. We are back in open session, so the meeting has been unlocked, recording has resumed, and the YouTube stream is now live. You may resume when ready. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now back in public session. The committee will now consider publicly each of the items, and there was one item, considered in closed session. So I will resume AU 11.6, status of the governance framework for effective cybersecurity management. I'll ask, are there any members of the committee with questions on this item? Seeing none, I will ask, are there any members of the committee wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will then move the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. I'll do one final check with Madam Clerk. Is there any other requirements to finish consideration of 11.6?
That is complete, Mr. Chair. The committee has completed its agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Auditor General, your team, all city staff, and of course to the committee, thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.